tonight's topic, why we're all here tonight, great topic, very timely, Cyberwar, Battlefield, IoT, Wearables, and Sensors. Karun is our moderator tonight. Please come on up. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Karun Rajasekharan, and we have a great event for you tonight. So what are we talking about? You know, we all start about the Internet of Things. It's a fantastic invention where, you know, we can get a lot of things done. Everything is connected to each other. I can just think about it, as someone said, and Google already knows to send a car, or to tell Uber to send a car to pick me up. On the other hand, you know, not everything works as, you know, flawlessly as expected. Like, so I try to get a Coke and it says machine is upgrading. You know, I never had that issue with my old Coke machine, right? Or I go to my refrigerator to get some water and it says USB key not found. I can't get water from my refrigerator, you know. It's a bit of a challenge here. But that's funny, but it gets a lot more serious when I can't turn off my lights because my Hue hub is updating and it says don't turn off lights till update is done. Oh, and by the way, please click on the user agreement. You know, and I have no idea what the user agreement is because I'm trying to go to bed. The one on the left is even more worrisome. That's a picture of a lift which says no database. It's like, how do I get down from this building when there's, and it says, can you please restore my database? It gets more serious, like somebody hacked into the pet feeder and the dog is starving, you know, the automated pet feeder. And then, of course, you realize it's running Windows 7 on the back end, and there's a pop-up which says, please upgrade to Windows 10. But it gets to, you know, we heard of ransomware and, you know, people calling from Nigeria or wherever, but what about when your thermostat says, hey, pay 1 Bitcoin, I don't know what the current rate is, so that you can turn down your AC or turn. So with that, I'm just trying to set the stage here. We have a couple of, we have 3 great experts here on security and IoT. So I'd like to invite them on stage. Greg Adams, Derek Harp, and David Dabbiere. So David, I would like to start with you about talking about some of the consumer.
Supposed to go last.
Well, I call you in last, and you know you can go first.
Okay.
So David, tell us some more about, you know, some of the consumer, you know, IoT things and some of the issues that you have seen while you're doing, you know, in your career. And
sure.
Tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, and let me first introduce myself. My name is David Dabbiere. I started off in a very mundane profession. I worked with Procter & Gamble out of school and came to Atlanta to bring a company called Manhattan Associates, which is a supply chain company, public. And from there, one of our first employees started the business I'm with now, WanderingWifi, which we pivoted into a company called AirWatch, which we sold a couple years ago to VMware. So VMware was looking to divest, and I was in the lead of this, WanderingWifi. And so I got together with my brother and partner, and we said, hey, why don't we buy it? So we repurchased WanderingWifi, which is about a 100-person company, which does hotspot management for companies like IHG, Panera Bread, Chick-fil-A. And we also were working on, I guess since this is being taped, a unnamed large beverage company based in Atlanta that has a device which dispenses sodas at the touch of a button, and which you saw in an early slide. Along with kiosks and the like that we're doing for some hotels, and then work for some grocery stores in helping to utilize both wireless and Bluetooth to help move traffic throughout the store. So that's kind of our foray. We've repivoted the company from a wireless company to an Internet of Things company, and by next week we should have a new name.
Derek.
So Derek, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yep. I'm Derek Harp. I'm the chairman and one of the founders of NexDefense. I'm new to Atlanta, but I'm going to have to drop that soon. I've been here 2 years, but I moved a company from Silicon Valley, NexDefense, here to actually to build it out, and it's proved to be a pretty good decision. So we've had a good time in Atlanta, and I moved my family here, so this is home now. My background is cybersecurity for the most part, but it is serial entrepreneurship. I started my first company in 1997, which ended up at Cisco Systems, a company called LogicKeep, and that was born out of stuff I was doing in the Navy. And I started with another Navy officer, in fact. We got out and built that, and since then I've been starting companies. And probably will stick to cybersecurity. It's where I've had my best successes. I've strayed and had other experiences. So cyber's where it is for me now.
And Greg Adams?
Okay, Derek, can you say y'all?
Not yet.
You'll be a native when that happens, okay. Greg Adams, so my background is cybersecurity. I moved to Atlanta to start a company that quickly led to another small company called Internet Security Systems, actually where I met Karun, and worked there for many years, led products for ISS, and had stints with IBM and Hewlett-Packard, but my passion is starting companies. So I'm currently with a small company called Predikto. And Predikto is focused on predictive analytics for the industrial Internet of Things. So we focus on planes, trains, and shipping is our primary focus. And it's an early space, a very early space. But the opportunity is tremendous. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but just some stats on those types of assets. So the latest 787 from Boeing generates 500 gigabytes of flight. 500 gigabytes of flight. Now, I don't know how you pump that off the aircraft, but they generate that much data. A crane, the normal crane that you see, 2 terabytes of data per year. Okay, so people don't realize the amount of information that these assets are generating, and that's got to be transmitted, that's got to be stored, that's got to be analyzed. And what we realized at Predikto was you can't do that manually. And so we focused on the data science problem, and we've created an engine that automates data science. We like to say we have 1,000 data scientists in a box. And so we apply that technology to predict things such as, is this aircraft going to have a delay? Is this train going to fail? Is the pulley on this crane going to wear out? And it may seem like mundane application, but if you look at a locomotive, for example, a typical locomotive is down about 11% of its lifetime, and each year that's about $350,000. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you take a normal railroad like a CSX or Norfolk Southern, they have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 locomotives. And so it's the scale of these devices that makes this an attractive space and such a high value. So that's what we focus on at Predikto. Thank you.
Great. And Greg, maybe you can start off. And what are the kind of cyber security or IoT threats that you see in your space, in the transportation space?
Yeah. So I'll be honest. I don't sugarcoat things. One of the challenges in our space is let's stay on the locomotive. Average locomotive is 20 years old. Some locomotives are 50 years old. And so you've got companies that have been building big iron, the GEs, the Caterpillars, great companies, but now they're being forced to become software companies, okay? And that's a big shift for these companies. So those of you that are in software know software enough is a challenge, but securing that is an even bigger challenge. So you've kind of got this environment where you have big iron companies meeting bleeding edge technology, and security is often an afterthought. And so the other thing is it's often later on. So I often laugh when I hear about some of these old standards that are used on these assets. I was reading about Modbus today. I don't know the last time. I don't think Modbus was after I got out of college. But anyway, but it was not built to be secure. So that is a challenge. The other aspect that we see is these big data initiatives are typically not led from the IT department. They're led through operations, they're led through the mechanical departments, and to be honest with you, they're trying to figure out ways to not get IT involved. So
It was just legal.
yeah, so that's an issue. But anyway, that's a little bit of the environment that we live in today.
Oh, yeah. And Derek, what would you say in the industrial?
Some similar things. We're focused on industrial internet. IIoT is kind of a term that GE and others are using. Industry 4.0 in Europe and in Germany specifically. Same kind of term, which is really talking about welding together people, process, and things. And this is in widespread use in things we rely on, like our utilities, and gas and oil and pipelines, building control systems, this very building here, the street lights, wastewater, water treatment. If you start thinking about all the things that are now networked, and these networks are different. Modbus is industrial protocol. There are hundreds of industrial protocols. They are different than normal TCP/IP or normal internet protocol communications. Some of them are being wrapped up in internet protocol and transmitted around, and then on the other end they go back to the industrial protocol. But the bottom line is there's a 20 years of technology. The locomotive is old, so are machines in settings that you and I rely on to work effortlessly and reliably. You'll find DOS still out there, certainly Windows 3, you'll find XP, which is now not supported. The tech refresh rate on this side of the equation, what we call the OT networks, operating technology networks, is nothing like what you would find in IT networks, which might be, 3 or 4 years at most, and you get a tech refresh. So it's managed, it's different in so many ways. It's managed by different people. They would call themselves real engineers, electrical and mechanical engineers, not software people, not IT people. So it's a challenging problem. There are problems for those of us that's been in the industry for a long time that are like stepping back in time. And we can address some things maybe in refreshing ways that we learned in IT, and other approaches that we used to use don't really work in this environment. And one example would be patching. So you might have in some industries multiple 9 nines of uptime or 7 nines of uptime down only next November for 6 hours planned outage. That is very unlike an IT network, and you just have to operate an entire different philosophy on when you're going to do patching and when you're going to put in some sort of new product or service. So there's a lot of constraints, and we really rely on these things to work and not go down.
Right, and I think I remember X-Force wanted to buy a $50,000 SCADA system to test, and I think we shot them down and said, no, you're not buying a $50,000 box to test. It's a cost. It's like, I can't buy a locomotive to do penetration testing on it.
We should have.
We should have. David.
Sure. But we do know there's a lot of money in it. I mean, anybody that went to the IoT symposium, and again, who's here from TAG? Anybody? Yeah, TAG did an outstanding job, getting the IoT symposium set up, and also TAG also worked with a very interesting session with Tino earlier this year, where the FBI and Secret Service were here on security. And I thought the most interesting learning that came away for me on Internet of Things, and let's kind of start this with, I think Elaine at the Georgia Tech Institute of Internet of Things has a great opening slide. And he starts off with, you're going to spend your first 5 minutes trying to decide really what everybody's talking about when they say Internet of Things. And that, to me, is absolutely true. It's one of the reasons we got into mobility at AirWatch. When people looked at mobility, was it the real estate on the screen? Was it managing the device? Was it the wireless network that it went on? It was fantastic because there were 1 billion of these things in a great market. Now we're at 20 billion and growing at a tremendous amount. So those of you that are going into IoT, this is absolutely the right time to do it. But the question now on security is, it's truly an afterthought, as you said. And one of the things I thought that was the most interesting comment from the Secret Service guy is, well, it's not really an afterthought. People are relying on security by proximity. Okay, that's really interesting. So it brought to mind a very interesting slide I used to do when I would start off by asking how many people brought an iPhone or a device, how many people brought 2 devices, 3 devices. Well, the thing that you don't realize at the time was people were carrying these things not thinking about security, which is why they weren't managing them. You go into Internet of Things, it was a great thing that happened at that time about 3 or 4 years ago. There was a toilet that was being sold for about $10,000 in New York apartments. And the code to get onto it was 1111, couldn't be changed. People were standing outside these apartments in New York and messing with people, turning the bidet into a little water show because they could. And there was absolutely no way to modify that. And it's a great little thing that was on CNET. And I used to do that slide all the time because you got this great little water show that people could do standing outside the apartment. And that was the proximity. As long as you were close to it, you could adjust it. Same thing with thermostats and things like that. The objective is you're going to have to secure it based on people not being able to get into your house. That's really not the right way to do it. And that's where, again, security is an afterthought. I think people are now going to have to start thinking, and that's one of the things we're kind of concentrating on, is how do you actually, we secured devices to begin with. How do you secure 20 billion, 30 billion, 40 billion sensors that are going to be out there in the very, very near future? Trains are a great example. At the Internet of Things Symposium, you actually saw what Accenture was doing with Trenitalia, where you've got these billion-dollar projects going on with all of the data which is coming in off of these trains and planes and automobiles, and what the heck are you going to do with it, and how are you going to secure it? Beats me.
So what does it take to, I guess, get the current thinking around that? Is it going to take some massive, event, like a 911 kind of cyber event, to suddenly have everyone say, oh, you need to focus on that? Where do you think the shift will come?
Yeah, we kept hoping for one at AirWatch. Most of those are hushed. We thought, man, that's going to send sales, 10x. We figured within the 4 years that we were doing it, you were going to see something like that. And the reality is, you see it. The point is, it's not really advertised or capitalized on. So I don't really think that it's going to be a security breach per se. And this is my personal opinion. I don't think it's going to be a security breach that's going to bring it to the forefront. It's going to be people's desire to have at least some level of security. And then it goes back to the awareness. Again, my other favorite line is, how many of you guys are willing to give me your credit card? No. How many of you are willing to tell me where you live? No. Where your kids go to school? No. Where your wife is shopping, or your spouse is shopping, or your husband is shopping right now? No. How many of you use Uber? Everybody raises their hand and says yes. So for a $5 cab ride, you've actually given up all of those data, and you said, okay, my privacy and security is not really that important to me. Or any of you that have ever turned on a Samsung TV, the license agreement for a Samsung television, I actually read it, actually gave them the right, up until the recent issue, gave them the right to video you, just so that you could activate your television. None of you guys ever read that, did you? You did? Yeah, both Samsung and LG actually said, you're free. Go ahead and tape me. It's absolutely amazing where people don't realize what the security breaches are until it gets some sort of publicity.
Derek, anything to add?
Yeah, I think there's no silver bullet. I love technology, but the truth is the human element of this, training, we've got to get everybody, and not just, I'm not talking about security people who need to get specialized training, but everybody, security awareness, security hygiene. Your statistic about 86%, it's clicking on something you shouldn't click on. And even in the industrial setting, the Ukraine, I don't know if anybody's seen the attack on the Ukrainian power grid in December. 3 different geographic regions were brought down at the same time, most likely state-sponsored. And it starts with stealing credentials. Just all these sophisticated attacks start with unsophisticated things. I mean, in the end of the day, we've got to get much better. So I think it's a 3-legged stool. I think there's a role for technology, new inventions, new innovations. Human beings have got to get a lot better security awareness and training. And then there is a role for some policy. I'm not for a heavy-handed government role, but I think there's some things come from that direction too that change behavior and change corporate decision-making, which we're gonna have to spend some more. And that's a scary prospect because I know, because I was pitching venture capital firms in 1997 and being told that information security was still a bit too niche-y. It was about $1 billion industry for the first time in 1997, and now it's 90 billion. I think. Is that all? 80 to 90 billion. Well, so it'll be, at this rate and the amount of attack surfaces we're adding, it'll be in, 180 billion in the next, the next 15 years.
Yeah, and I think you remember Stuxnet, when they attacked the Iranian centrifuges, they just put USB keys in the parking lot, and I'm sure any parking lot you put Taylor Swift videos for free or something, you bet 10 people will at least put it into their laptops and run whatever is on there, right? So
yeah, no mysterious USB keys. Know where they came from before you ever insert them anywhere. That's a good rule.
Unless it's Taylor Swift.
Unless it's Taylor Swift. And Greg, you brought up a point which is really the big data part of it, which all this data, obviously you can attack the sensors, but all this data is going to the back end. And
Yeah. When we talk about data, we talk about the big data and the little data. And I don't know if that's an industry term, but the big data is what streams off of these sensors. It's the large volume of data, but the little data is the operations records, the maintenance records, the work schedule, this type of thing. And both of those are very valuable. And I would say to your question, we see two drivers that are bringing security, at least to somewhat of a visible level. One is the companies are starting to realize the value of the data. And they know that, hey, there's an asset here that I need to protect. Okay, so we do start to see, and I think we're going to hit upon it in privacy, they're recognizing that there's value in the data. So they want to protect that. So that drives some level of awareness around security. The second is government mandates. So the one that's most visible is positive train control. So this is the system that's being put in place to keep trains from running into each other or engineers from falling asleep. It's a wonderful system, but it's a very complex system. But it was built with security in mind. So there are a lot of security controls that were mandated from a regulations perspective. So, I see those two drivers, at least in the industrial sector.
Okay. And Derek, do you see the same things or anything to add on that?
Yeah, there's regulation in the IIoT. Really, the only real regulation with punitive punitive damage opportunities is what's called NERC SIP, and that applies to utilities, and it doesn't apply to other industry sectors. And what you have in other sectors is you have adoption of guidelines, the NIST cybersecurity framework for critical infrastructure. You have companies starting to say, and I know of one of the largest gas and oil companies in the world that we would all know, they are mapping to that framework. They're saying in lieu of something else, we'll at least say we're doing something, a best practice. And so that's encouraging, that people are saying, okay, instead of just kind of hoping to do the best, we'll map to something and then give ourselves a scorecard and try to self-regulate ourselves, if you will. There are other countries. France has taken the NIST cybersecurity framework, the SIP guidelines, and they've wrestled with it a little bit, but there's a lot of stuff that was ported over, but they're applying it to quite a few more industry verticals than utilities. So you see some of that starting to happen, and that will at least then put some pressure. I think that the C-level suite and the board level suite is also realizing, some public incidents, not necessarily in the industrial or IoT side, but public incidents that we all have been reading about, where you can lose your job at the end of that. So I think people are starting to look and say, what are all of our exposures? Risk management is something. There is a language around that, and there is a business understanding of risk and mitigation. And I think they're starting to say, oh wow, our risk is a bigger portfolio of risk than maybe we were looking at even 5 years ago.
Right, and we've done risk analysis, but again, it was mainly to IT systems, but now I guess the point is you can't just think of IT systems as everything, locomotives or industrial.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think there's going to come a point where IT in these large companies is going to have to exert control over the data. Right. It's not there today. I honestly can say it's not there today. It's going to have to be, and it's going to be driven by the factors that have been mentioned here.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have some?
And the reason I always think it's an afterthought, how many people here work in an IT department? So we got a few. I mean, frankly, the C-suite never says IT sped up that project. It's rarely considered that when I go talk to my CISO or I go talk to my IT department, that they're going to help me get a product out the door. Or if we start going through a risk-benefit analysis, that it's going to really, you explain, I know the competition's going to get out there before me, but I'm doing it the right way. So as long as I can be second and do it knowing I did it the right way, I'm comfortable with that. That's the challenge that we're in right now. And, you raised some really good points, especially with respect to data, and we're going to get into that on the privacy side. But, you're generating such an incredible amount of data among all of this stuff. And frankly, I truly am in the discovery phase right now. I mean, we're trying to figure out, we've got some great projects that we're doing right now, But, I'm down at Georgia Tech on an incredibly frequent basis talking to the professors on their projects with big data. They're mapping the human genome. They're looking at ways that they can compress data, analyze it, use it, and we're looking at ways that we can own it. That's frankly to give you the kind of pragmatic, capitalistic point of view. There's a lot of data out there. You brought up Google. Alan Warren, that heads the Google project on this, did a really nice presentation on Google's desire and their ability today to be able to tell you where you're going to be going on vacation next week. And so their objective is not only based on your personality, your searches, your data, all of this, they're actually getting to that point where they can send you a weather report for Aruba knowing that you're going to be buying plane tickets for it before you actually know you're going to buy plane tickets to Aruba. The other way to look at that is, and this is what I told the panelists ahead of time, they actually know when you're going to kill your spouse, what you're going to use, and it's before you've even decided that you're going to do it. That is how predictive analytics and data are being used today, and it's incredibly valuable. So you move into the amount of data which is being generated right now, the number of the types of predictive analytics in the various industries. Automotive, trains are a great example. You look at what Accenture and Trenitalia are doing. You look at what Volvo is already doing. Volvo has sensors in every part of the engine. They're using predictive analytics to be able to determine when that vehicle is going to be serviced, rather than the traditional once a month a Volvo truck has to go in to get serviced. Now they're using predictive analytics based on the sensors in the engine on heat, temperature, conditions that it's being used at to go ahead and say, now it's time to go ahead. And what are they doing? They're not just telling you need to have an appointment at the Volvo dealer. They're actually setting up an appointment at the Volvo truck dealer so that you can go there. And are they going to send you to the closest Volvo dealer? No. They're sending you to the closest Volvo dealer that has the parts you need. Why have the truck go there and sit? So that's where, and so now you kind of get into, these are the pragmatic business applications. I no longer have to bring my semi in every month. I can, because of my driving, think of the not Geico, but the Progressive ad where they're doing, your driver awareness and bringing your rates down. Truck drivers, same sort of thing. They're determining, when is my truck going to have to be serviced? I don't have to go into the dealer, and if I do, it's not going to be a 3-day downtime waiting for this thing to get serviced because they have to order parts. They've actually got my appointment set up and the part waiting for me when I drive in there to get it done. That's what people are focused on right now versus the security aspect of it.
Right, and we talked about this, and as the key point is, who does the data belong to? Like traditionally, if I bought an appliance, I had to assume it was mine. Yes. But now I might be buying a Boeing 777, and Delta realizes, wait, the data is not coming to me, it's going to Boeing. And is that part of the deal?
Yeah. And that's a great point, because we're working with, we've been approached by a couple of manufacturers right now, given our customer base, that want to start looking at the data being collected and how they can best utilize that. And we talked about this in our kind of preview. Who owns those data? And it's a great question. I mean, right now, if you're Google or your Samsung recorder, it's pretty easy. I know I signed a license agreement that said Samsung can see me as I'm preparing dinner when I've got the TV on or off. It doesn't matter. They're taking a picture of me no matter what. When you move to Google, you've signed a license agreement with Google. When you agreed to Uber, Uber can track you. Uber knows where each of you are if you've ever used it. So you've already agreed to that. Your examples are fantastic, because now if I'm the engine manufacturer or the train manufacturer, well, the engine didn't come from the train company. It came from somebody else. And so now you got a license agreement for that. You've got the service place. So let's go ahead and take trucks. Trucks are actually going into truck stops, gas stations, restaurants, and all of those data are being collected everywhere the truck goes. Not only is it sensor data, it's RFID data. And the amount of predictive analytics and the way you can monetize that sort of data, frankly, is tremendous when you think about it. And so you're getting into this very interesting issue now of who actually owns the data. Is it multiple owners? Is it the one individual? This is, again, we kind of talked about standards, and that's where the RFID standards boards got caught up. That's why you don't see RFID chips on every product when you go to the grocery store.
But then it's also not just the locomotive. I'm not going to buy a locomotive, but I have an iPhone, And it seems that Uber
All
can
of it.
tell when my phone battery is dying and charge me more because they know that I'm going to take the ride quickly before my phone dies.
Oh, yeah.
So hold on, my battery information is mine, right?
Exactly.
So Derek or Greg?
Not
you
really.
have-
No, it's actually iPhones.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just a battle over who owns the data. There are legitimate reasons to have the data. So you mentioned the transportation. A lot of these companies now are what they call power by hour, which means they essentially are renting, a better term, renting the equipment from the original equipment manufacturer. And the original equipment manufacturer, it's not a warranty on the airplane or the locomotive. It's a warranty that it will provide so much uptime, a certain SLA. And so they have to have access to this data in order to perform these services. And so it's a complex question, and I don't have the answer. But we often have to go between the OEM and the owner of the equipment to get the data, to have a full picture.
And Derek, any thoughts on that?
I thought the data was just going up into the cloud. I like the Facebook meme that's like, there's no such thing as cloud. It's someone else's
It's someone
computer.
else's computer, exactly. Which actually comes back to, really my thought as a consumer, what should I do? Just turn off the phone and, put that tinfoil hat on myself, or so let's go personally. What is your threshold for what you would do or not do? And maybe that's it's a guideline, right?
I think that's a good question. We were talking earlier,
Yeah.
I forget who it was, and someone was explaining something, it was you, about the panel. I saw this same behavior on a different panel, which is some security experts talking about the woes of doing banking on your phone. And you and I did the same thing. I asked the panel, I said, how many, after 15 minutes of going on about all the woes of internet banking, how many of you do it? And they all raised their hand. And I go, exactly. So we really need to confine our conversation to practicalities, because that's to say it's dangerous isn't very practical. We're all doing it. We want these features. I'm an adopter. I use home automation. I'm playing around with it. I've replaced a lot of switches with smart switches. The front door of my house is not on that system. It's a good old manual lock. It struck me as pragmatic to have just keep that as a standard lock. I didn't need to be able to open that with my phone.
I've got 2 dogs. Very efficient.
But inside the house, I am playing around with some new technologies, and I do like some of the functionality. And I am well aware that Zigbee and Z-Wave are, have been penetrated and broken and misused by white hat and black hat researchers or hackers. So I think we just all have to go into it. It's about knowledge. It's about accepting risk. I think a lot of people are probably using things without any knowledge of the risk they're taking. That's a different situation. It's one thing to say, I'm going to do these things and I know what I'm doing, and I've decided the risks outweigh the positives outweigh the risks.
And Greg, do you have any home automation?
Heavy home automation.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it's a great thing. I love it. But I am concerned about the security. But my hands are in, the fate of Nest, which I guess is Google now. God help me. But you have to be careful. Coming from a cybersecurity background, it's a lot of common sense pieces. So I think you just have to be on the alert as a consumer. I personally, I don't use Google as my general login. I avoid all of that. I've had bad experiences with that. Everything I log into is a separate account. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it makes me feel better whether it really works or not. But I think as a consumer, you just have to be alert.
Okay. we'd like to open it up to the audience here, and I'm sure there are tons of questions. Well, right in front.
Sure. The question was based on data which is coming in, and the project that Tech is working on is actually with the NIH to determine the predictive analytics for healthcare issues. And interestingly enough, yes, that's what the Tech projects, a number of them are actually related to. We actually, as a family, have a member with cancer in the family, and so we've actually personally sponsored a number of research projects exactly around that. It started off very simply. I'm fifth out of 6 boys, and so we started with the oldest brother and had him go through a physical and analyze so that we could use those predictive analytics to determine what was going to happen to the rest of us in the next 5, 10, 15 years. But yes, that's exactly what those projects are dealing with. And the challenge that you're running into is that the amount of data just from a single human is incredible. So this is really at the very early stages of trying to assess just actually gathering the data, let alone developing the predictive analytics.
So the question was about education. How do you educate the consumers, not just the consumers, but also the industrial users? So sorry, I'm just waiting here.
I'll answer the second part. I think you could answer that, you get different answers for that kind of problem area. So one thing that I'm doing is I started a meetup here in Atlanta, Greater Atlanta Cybersecurity for Control Systems meetup, and it was really an experiment about 1.5 years ago, and it was like, let's bring people together to talk about this, a peer group, and that's now I've got that in 20 cities, and it's growing very rapidly. About 2,400 people have joined it, so I'm forming a 501c6 not-for-profit entity to manage it, and we're continuing to grow, and sponsors are lining up. But it's a peer group. It's the global aspect of it is just to help support the local groups so they can get together. And here we have original equipment manufacturers coming together with people from a hospital and people from MARTA and people from integrators that are actually working on systems and talking about what are you doing about that and what are you doing about that. So I think information exchange. I'm a big believer in that. And I think the problem area has other aspects.
My previous company was Pin Drop Security, and we focused on securing the phone channel. Now, your app on your phone is a relatively secure app. They're modern, they're built with security in mind. The weakest link in the phone is when you call your bank. Okay, I've sat with a number of call centers. You call the bank. Okay, what's your mother's maiden name? Blah blah blah. I actually had one where, and this was an attempt to break in, the caller said, well, what's your mother's maiden name was the question. My father's been married 3 times. Do I get 3 guesses? Okay. And they let him. Okay. So the weak link is not the technology. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned here was biometric secure. And I think you have to understand that there's always the lowest common denominator to allow people to do business in these channels. And that is an education problem right there. You can't secure it, you can't encrypt it. It's an education problem.
And it's really hard. I mean, back to your point, I mean, you're familiar with a company locally called BitPay? Yeah. So, BitPay got hacked in the 87%. So what happened was you would imagine that management team is extremely sophisticated when it comes to password protection. And they responded to an email and got in. So, it's extremely hard. It's kind of like, you asked a very good question. Do you use one system? I frankly had a great debate with my brother. Do I use one global system for my house, which is what he opted for? So when that breaks, he can't use his pool, his lights, his tennis court, or anything else. I have each of the individual components. So my stereo is on the Pioneer AV. I've got the pool system, which is I can't remember what it's called. Honeywell is my because there's only one left. Yeah. Honeywell is my AC. So now at least if any one thing goes wrong, at least I'll either have air conditioning or a pool. So I get a great option. When you go back to that, I have a security password for every single one of those. So what is my spouse's solution? She has a book that she keeps in the house with every password nicely outlined and actually tried to make it more cryptic so that I could guess, which requires virtually anybody could guess. So it's really hard when you're looking at this. So biometrics, I think, frankly, will be a great approach. But to your point, today it's strictly a convenience. I mean, the sole thing you're doing, just like you said, the only reason, and we developed a product, back at AirWatch for the FBI to try to do this because the FBI had this concern that FBI agents that were driving at 80 or 90 miles an hour chasing bad guys couldn't put in a 15-digit alphanumeric code into their phone to call for backup. And interestingly enough, we agreed with them. So we said, we think we can solve that using biometrics. And that kind of goes to the whole heart of how do you secure this stuff? What's the right answer? In the Internet of Things world, I don't think we have those answers yet.
Sure. So the question was about the fragmentation of platforms. There are lots of different platforms out there, and obviously that's a challenge for security in trying to get them all to work together. So any comments from the panel?
I mean, I will say in our business, we deal with no customer is the same, no platform is the same, multiple different systems, and we have to handle it all. And part of the challenge is how do you pull all that together and glue all that together. So that's part of the challenge in the IIoT space is that I haven't solved the how do you secure all those channels, but we have to pull it together, we have to glue it together. It's a mess, quite frankly.
So the question is, how do you you're a large company, but you obviously deal with lots of vendors. So Target was example, and I think part of it was their cleaning company, which was HVAC company, sorry. Right, whereas I think one of the things is HIPAA, for example, has a business associate agreement. So I do some consulting for a medical company, so they have to have BAA with the hospitals, right?
Sure, and this is, wearing my old hat. I mean, you're absolutely correct. The problem is you're now talking money. So you want to sit in the boardroom and you want to say, okay, we want to have a very secure IT department. Let's take it to mobility. Everybody wanted to use their mobile phones and be able to access email. Well, there was no requirement on iPhones to have a password, right? So people were hacking into their IT and getting their messages. And do you know who the original culprits of that was? It was the boardroom. I was on the golf course and I saw my buddy getting his email, and I went to my IT manager and I said, hey, I want my email. And the IT manager said, sorry, you can't do that because, you know all that protection you have on your laptop? There's a reason for that. So when the next IT manager came on board, guess what happened? That board member got his email, no questions asked. So, do as I say, not as I do. So, and again, it comes at, not insignificant cost when you're looking at, doing that across a large enterprise. So when let's get back to the whole IoT piece, you don't have encryption in a lot of this stuff. So I mean, really, let's take it back away from, I can secure a device. It's got the ability to do that. I can secure an airplane. I can secure a train, right? I can secure this. There are a lot of things I can secure. I can't secure my thermometer, my temperature sensor. I cannot secure, so my security for my stereo system up at my lake house is based on proximity. When you're on my Wi-Fi, when you're on my network up at my lake house, anybody that wants to turn the stereo on and blast it for everybody else in the world down on my boathouse is welcome to do it. Okay, why is that? It's because it goes back to that security by proximity. That's what you're going to get, and it's not viewed as mission critical. So now you're getting into a very interesting topic of let's start segregating what's mission critical or what's personal in terms of banking, because I bank online. I loathe these people that tell me not to do stuff and then they turn around and do it. This was lawyers on document retention. I can give you hundreds of examples of people telling me not to do, which is why early on I learned to say, let me see your phone. Let me see your laptop. No. Well, I just want to see if you're doing what you're telling me to do. Nobody does it. They just make a lot of money consulting. It's unbelievable. So, it kind of goes back to once you, get these things adopted, I think it goes back to security being an afterthought.
And I think we have one last question. Yeah, go ahead.
We are on the consumer side. Now, again, we're just 2 months into a new business. So we're literally a 100-person startup. But we've got projects going on with grocery stores where if you consider, the key to a grocery store is having people stay there as long as possible and move around. So, they're working to, get that login immediately and then use a combination of Bluetooth and wireless to identify that individual. How many of you love getting all of those neat little coupons printed off as you're getting your receipt when you go through a grocery store? And what do you do with them? That's not very practical. Now just imagine if you're in the grocery aisle, you're a young mom, and you're in the, produce aisle, you're a young mom, you're a month away from having purchased Pampers, so they know that you actually need Pampers, and all of a sudden an electronic coupon for $5 off on Pampers shows up. Well, the good thing is they've now moved you from one end of the store to the other. They've given you some money off, but they've got you to buy other things as you're migrating your way around there. So now what have you done? You've given up your privacy, you've given up your name, but you save $5 on Pampers. Hey, it's a great trade-off.
That looks a lot like a lab maze mouse experiment.
And we're enjoying it. When you see our new logo, it's actually a maze.
Yeah, and one of the things we see is the pieces of equipment that generate this data and the devices that transmit the data come from two different companies. So, if I'm a trained, just give me a wireless modem. Okay, so what we see is they're focused on security at the protocol level versus the device level. So.
That's a wrap? Okay. So that's a wrap. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for...